For Kahnawà, possibly a landmark decision, the Quebec Superior Court ruled in favor of Kahnawà in the case of the Roussillon, which is the surrounding mayors, who took the Quebec government to court regarding the Highway 30 lands that are to be returned to Kahnawà. It's an issue that's been ongoing for about 10 years, ever since the promise was made to send the land back to Kahnawà.
I think we're very reassured with the decision. I think it reflects exactly what we expected. Just to give you a summary of what the conclusions were in the judgment rendered by the Superior Court. The first conclusion was with regards to the request for nullity of Order in Council 498/2013, and that was an instrument that the Council of Ministers, so the Government of Quebec, adopted in order to transfer parcels A to E to the federal government in order for them to convert the lands to reserve status for the benefit of the Mohawks of Kahnawà. With regards to that conclusion, the plaintiffs were arguing that, first of all, they had not been adequately consulted. They later dropped that argument and admitted that Quebec had no obligation to consult them. Later on, and then they somewhat altered their argumentation at the very end and argued that Quebec had acted in bad faith, and the adoption of the decree was actually an abuse of their power. The judge did not agree with that assessment. She felt that not only had they been adequately consulted, they went well above and beyond in consulting them. I mean, there was lots of exhibits that proved that they had been consulted by the federal government, the provincial government, and even the Mohawk Council of Kahnawà. And it was well within within the discretion of the provincial government to adopt this decree. Second, and alternatively, they were seeking the annulment of Condition 3 of Order in Council 498/2013. That condition was basically included in the Order in Council in order to ensure that once the land was converted to reserve status, it would have all the same rights and status as the current reserve, which is very important. The plaintiffs, the conclusion that was being sought by the plaintiffs was a declaratory judgment in order to have specific laws, specific provincial laws applied to the land once it was converted to reserve status. So we're talking about municipal laws, so municipal regulations, zoning bylaws, fiscal taxation laws. So they want to be able to ensure that they would be able to tax any non-native occupants on the lands. They want to ensure that they would have a say in how the land would be used, what type of to apply to those lands. So from A to Z, I think for each of the conclusions, the judge rendered a decision that was favorable to the Mohawks of Kahnawà.
Well, council is going to meet on this and go through the whole briefing from legal on the outcome of this. But you're right, there is a smile, but there's not a real victory here because there's certain losses that had taken place. There was, economic development that was looked at for that land. There was an expectancy for it to be returned. The outcome, yes, is favorable to Kahnawà because Canada and Quebec were acting within their authority to do those things. And unfortunately, the municipalities were allowed to take this to court and drag the situation out for as long as they did. And it was a delay tactic that worked against us. And again, they wanted to have the municipal laws applied to the land. And it's an unreasonable ask. So there is much to be discussed around this decision.
Well, we were actually waiting for the decision to come down, and it came down a little earlier than we had thought. So we were actually starting to work on plans to what our sort of action, to put forward what our action is going to be following the decision. Luckily, we had just started doing some of that work when the decision came down, and so now it's a matter of putting some of those plans in action. We have a team that's dedicated to working on what the next steps are going to be. I think that if we look at this as a significant step, we've got a whole series of steps that we have to take from here on in, and we have to ensure that the chiefs are provided with all the information that they need in order to determine which direction to take this. The federal government has certain obligations that we are probably going to have to press that they actually follow through with some of these things now. So the decision was on Quebec's legal decree that they had put forward. Now that that's freed up, now the pressure is really on Canada. And so we need to look to Council to give us the direction on exactly how they want to put pressure on Canada to advance and ensure that the transfer actually does take place and the lands are declared reserve status.
Well, we're very happy with all the work that went into this. There was a lot of hours that were put in by our legal team. Hats off to them to, be out there in the courtroom and fighting for our rights. And the outcome also is going to have the municipalities compensate us for the cost that, we had to defend ourselves. So that's one of the victories that we're happy with. And, they kept insinuating, or not insinuating, they kept insisting that we were going to have an economic advantage over them if we were to get the lands back. We do not have the infrastructure available to us. We do not have the economic advantage at this point because the infrastructure that's going to be required to develop that as a business jurisdiction is going to be very costly, and those dollars aren't even found yet. So there's no real economic advantage. If anything, we're behind the 8 ball because we don't have that infrastructure. Yes, Quebec still owes Kahnawà 200 acres, and that is being looked at. There are different locations that have been looked at, but nothing has been settled. So it's not over yet. We're still owed.